welcome to the Book Fair. I'm Anthony, and this podcast is all about the freedom to read and children's literature. This week, Matt, aka Rockin.Librarian on TikTok, talks media literacy and misinformation. Book bans target hundreds of books in Florida. A UK study shows a gender gap in recreational reading among students. And Chicago public schools face a shortage of librarians. Turning first, an article from WUSF.org. Florida's Education Department releases a list of over 700 books removed in K-12 schools. The Florida Department of Education has released a list of over 700 books that were, quote, removed or discontinued from districts throughout the state last school year. That's an increase of almost 400 books from the list released for the previous school year. Florida law allows parents and residents to challenge elementary through high school level books containing themes including race, sexuality, and gender identity. The law also requires districts to submit an annual report to the state detailing which books have been restricted in their schools. The list released for 23 to 24 include titles by American literary icons like Maya Angelou, Flannery O'Connor, and Richard Wright. It also includes books that have become top targets for censorship across the country because they feature LGBTQ+ characters, discussions of gender and sexuality, and descriptions of sexual encounters, such as All Boys Aren't Blue by George Johnson and Gender Queer by Maya Kobabe. Conservative advocates have labeled such content pornographic. PEN America found Florida led the country again last year in book removals with over 4,500, costing districts about $34,000 to $135,000 a year. In a statement, the Department of Education defended the state's push to remove sexually explicit materials from schools. I'll admit this part is absurd. The department says, quote, "There are no books banned in Florida, and sexually explicit materials do not belong in schools." Once again, far-left activist groups are pushing the book ban hoax on Floridians. The better question is, why do these groups continue to fight to expose children to sexually explicit materials? The agency said. I'll include a link to the full article from WUSF.org at patreon.com/thebookfair. Following is completely free. You do not have to pay to follow the podcast. You can also follow on Blue Sky at BookFairPod. That is where I am most active, and of course, am posting all of these links and reports as I find them. Next up, we have some brighter news from Chicago Sun-Times. CTU pushes for libraries and librarians in every CPS school. The Chicago Teachers Union is pushing for librarians in every Chicago public school, saying at a news conference Tuesday that the decision to cut them is hurting students. Students and their reading levels are still recovering from pandemic-induced school closures and online learning, CTU members say. And a rise of public misinformation begs for better information literacy among children. Quote, "In order to support libraries, they must be funded," end quote. Tara Donnelly, a librarian at Foreman College and Career Academy, said at a news conference Tuesday. Quote, "If they are not funded, it is the same outcome as book banning extremists. It is closing libraries and preventing access," end quote. The number of librarians has sharply declined since 2012, when the district had several hundred librarians, Donnelly said. CPS said it now employs 107 librarians for more than 500 district-run non-charter schools. CTU members and supporters handed out books to giddy children heading into George W. Tilton Elementary School in Garfield Park, which doesn't have a library. Quote, "You can look behind us. There are children running to get books," CTU Secretary Christelle Williams-Hayes said. Quote, "They are excited that they are being gifted books. Not toys, not video games, but books. Something that they wish they had in their building," end quote. The drive for more librarians partly stems from the 2013 decision to close 50 schools in the largest mass school closure in the country, CTU Financial Secretary Maria Moreno said. Now, CTU says students are struggling and the promised resources were never delivered, including librarians. The district pushed back against some union claims, touting that its literacy growth ranked first compared with 40 other urban districts. According to research from Harvard and Stanford universities studying the educational impact of the pandemic. The district has hired staff in other areas, and it has now more licensed educators with students in the district than ever before. During an 11-day CTU strike in 2019, the union demanded the district hire a librarian for every school, but the two sides didn't reach an agreement on that issue. The push for more school resources is also intertwined with Chicago's first school board election on Tuesday. Races across the city are largely focused on how to handle the projected $500 million budget deficit in upcoming years. But while librarians would add a cost, continuing to dwindle the number of them would come at a different price, their advocates say. It is worth noting that this article was published at Chicago Sun-Times on October 29th before the presidential election. Now we have President-elect Donald Trump, who has named Linda McMahon as his pick for the next Secretary of the Department of Education, a department which Donald Trump has previously stated he wishes to close entirely, which will cut funding to public schools across the country. This, of course, would severely worsen the $500 million budget deficit from Chicago Public Schools District. Final story for this week. From TheGuardian.com, report finds shocking and dispiriting fall in children reading for pleasure. Children's reading enjoyment has fallen to its lowest level in almost 2 decades, with just 1 in 3 young people saying that they enjoy reading in their free time, according to a new study. Only 34.6% of 8 to 18-year-olds surveyed by the National Literacy Trust in UK said that they enjoy reading in their spare time. This is the lowest level recorded by the charity since it began surveying children about their reading habits 19 years ago, representing an 8.8 percentage drop down since last year. It is also part of a broader downward trend since 2016, when almost 2 in 3 children said that they enjoyed reading. Reading frequency is also at a historic low, with 20.5% of 8 to 18-year-olds reporting reading daily in their free time, compared with 28% last year. The gender gap in reading has widened, with 28.2% of boys saying that they enjoyed reading in their free time, compared to 40.5% of girls. The NLT found that twice as many children who said they enjoyed reading in their spare time have above average reading skills compared with those who don't, 34.2% compared to 15.7%. I will, of course, include a link to the Guardian article as well as the original study at patreon.com/thebookfair and on Blue Sky. Reading the summary directly from NLT, quote, "For a report focused largely on reading enjoyment, much of this is not an enjoyable read. The declining levels of reading enjoyment and reading frequency are frankly shocking and dispiriting. We are not a lone voice." The Reading Agency's 2024 report into adult reading was similarly concerning, with only half of UK residents now reading regularly for pleasure, and those aged 16 to 34 being the least likely to do so. Our report should also be seen in the context of the most recent Progress in International Reading Literacy study, which saw England and Northern Ireland to have relatively low levels of reading enjoyment, with 1 in 4 10-year-olds reporting that they did not like reading, compared to an international study averaging of 1 in 5. In addition, our recent sister report on children and young people's writing in 2024 showed that writing enjoyment is also at a historic low in the UK, with fewer than 3 in 10 children and young people aged 8 to 18 saying that they enjoy reading and writing in their free time. Of course, the impact of enjoying reading and reading frequently extends beyond improved reading ability. Established research has linked reading enjoyment to attainment in other subject areas, including vocabulary development, cognitive performance, building empathy, and mental well-being. Our report points to the varied motivations that children and young people have for reading. Whilst 1 in 2 children said that they read to learn new words, a similar proportion read to help them relax. And other high scorers included reading to learn about issues and causes they cared about, reading to understand views of others, or reading simply because it made them happy. Our own research has demonstrated that 3 times as many children and young people who are not engaged with literacy have better mental well-being than those who are least engaged. If you are interested, you can check out this study, which also links other research studies that they have done in their summary that point to the statistics of reading being tied to mental well-being and engagement. And now let's look at some recent releases, beginning with Not for the Faint of Heart by Lex Croucher. Croucher presents a queer reimagining of the Robin Hood legend through the eyes of his granddaughter. As the daughter of the leader of the Merry Men, Marielle Hartley Hood has a lot to prove when her father takes over following her grandfather, Robin Hood's, retirement. After a hostage situation goes sideways and her father is captured, Marielle gears up for a daring rescue, provided that her increasingly complicated feelings for her cheery, chatty hostage, Clem Cousy, don't get in the way. Anachronistic humor and the modern cadence of dialogue prevent this hijinks-filled historical romance from feeling fully rooted in the medieval setting. Depiction of Robin Hood's anarchist mutual aid collective of merry men, juxtaposed with Marielle's father's leadership, adds teeth to this light-hearted rom-com adventure, which features explosively described fight sequences and a wealth of fun and campy tropes, including a slow-burning enemies-to-lovers romance. This book is recommended for ages 13 and up. Next is Darkly by Marisha Pessl. Though 17-year-old Dia enjoys working at her family's antiques shop, she worries that her life is going nowhere and yearns for more. Then she sees an ad from the Louisiana Veda Foundation, founded in honor of the 39 years dead eccentric genius of the same name, creator of the complicated board games, now collector's items, known as Darkly. The foundation is seeking 7 teens for an unusual summer internship, for which Dia applies and is accepted. The interns are taken to a small North Sea island off the coast of England, where they find their job to be much different and far more deadly than advertised. But with a life-changing cash prize on the line for each of them, Dia and her fellow interns refuse to back down. Twists and connections are satisfying and surprising in this high-stakes thriller by Pessl, who takes familiar YA tropes and turns them on their head using confident prose. Fearless and whip-smart Dia, as well as the rest of the intersectionally diverse cast, will have readers cheering them on from page 1. This book is recommended for ages 12 and up. Lastly, Heart-Shaped Lies by Elizabeth Agyemang. 3 teens band together to exonerate themselves after learning they simultaneously dated the same internet prankster and are now implicated in his murder. On-screen New Jersey vlogger Tommy Harding boosts classmate Priscilla Frimpong's beauty, influencer brand, and live streams pranks that notoriously conflate humor with cruelty and humiliate his girlfriend, Kiara Stevens. Off-screen, Tommy manipulates and abuses Kiara while secretly wooing Priscilla. Meanwhile, Miss Bible thumper Nevaeh Simon longs to meet her long-distance boyfriend, whose senior bus trip finds him and Kiara and Priscilla at the same Florida theme park that hosts her church's annual conference. But worlds collide when Tommy, publicly outed as a cheater who has exploited all 3 girls, is found dead in the park, and a hacker implicates Kiara, Priscilla, and Nevaeh in the murder, prompting them to reluctantly unite together to clear their names. Agyemang weaves intricate threads of betrayal into a social media-fueled mystery featuring a racially diverse cast. While some plot points stretch credulity, this tightly knit web of carefully layered deceit gives way to a slow-burning friendship story that will entice fans of soapy dramas. This book is recommended for ages 12 and up. Coming up next, an interview with Matt, aka Rockin.Librarian on TikTok to discuss media literacy. First, if you do enjoy the podcast, there are some ways you can help the podcast grow by simply leaving a review or rating wherever you're listening, or by going to patreon.com/thebookfair. You can follow for free or give a monthly donation to help the podcast grow. There, I will post links and articles that I share on the podcast, as well as posting those on Blue Sky at BookFairPod. Now, on to an interview with Rockin.Librarian. Hello, Matt. First off, there's a few things I want to throw at you just to see if any of this strikes a nerve. First off, there were no new wars under Trump. They're putting litter boxes in public schools. Donald Trump wears a diaper. These are things that people just repeat without any substantial evidence. And I kind of want to start off by getting into where these ideas are bred and why is it that people are inclined to latch on to these fringe ideas without looking into them.
Well, where they're bred is kind of a complex question, but I would say largely they come out of social media. They come out of X, in particular X and Facebook, and what they do is they provide people who have an already biased opinion towards these individuals. They have this ability to confirm what they already think, as in like aha moment. It's like, this is exactly what I was thinking because now I have the evidence to prove it. So if you're somebody who believes that there were no new wars under Donald Trump or anything like that, then you're going to believe that now that there's these slogans are out there. And that's what these are, basically. These are political slogans that have the force of emotion, and they have the force of confirming what you already think. That's what makes them powerful, is the fact that they confirm what you already believe in, and then when you repeat them over and over and over again on social media, when you see them getting thousands, if not millions of likes, all these things, that all primes the very things that make us believe those things that help us confirm what we already believe.
Right. It's confirmation bias, but it's also when you repeat a lie enough times, it begins to seep into people's minds and they begin to perceive it as true. The big one that is targeting a marginalized group is the idea that there are litter boxes in schools, or now they're saying that children are leaving for school and having gender reassignment surgery without parents' consent or knowledge.
Yep. So in addition to confirmation bias, there's also this thing called the primacy effect, which is essentially boils down to when you see something very early and then it's repeated over and over and over again, you tend to remember that thing the most. And so all of these are basic heuristics that all humans use, and they allow us to go through day to day without having to stop and think about every little thing. But the problem with them is that it makes us very susceptible to all of these notions that are not backed up by evidence. And the cat in the litter box thing is a good case in point, because of the fact that if you're already suspicious about trans issues, if you have a suspicion about it, and then you see this on social media and you see it early and you see it a lot, what that will do to you is it's going to make you believe that it's true, because one, it's confirming what you already believe in, and it's just giving you more evidence or as a line of thought. But two, you're seeing it so much, and you're seeing it in the places that you trust, that therefore it becomes a part of the evidence, a part of your reality, when in fact it's simply not there.
Right. And you mentioned the primacy effect where you hear it early and it's repeated often. So One thing that happens in the news is, let's take the litter boxes, for example. Joe Rogan went on his podcast and said that this is a thing that was happening. Mainstream news sources began to run with this story, citing him on his show for as the source of this information, saying that he heard it from someone else. But then, when pressed on it later on, he admit on his show that it was entirely based on a lie. The retraction did not travel as far as the original story did.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And there's good research out there that does show that even when you try to debunk something, that it typically not only does it not work, but it actually reinforces the belief or already, because people don't like having their beliefs challenged. There's this kind of again kind of a mental bias where we get cognitive dissonance almost, where we don't want to think about us being wrong, and it causes us mental anguish, so to speak, and so we just put it out of our mind. And the Joe Rogan piece is a great example, because Joe Rogan is so big, he's so popular that it reaches so many people, and when people think of Joe Rogan, there's a good section of society that thinks, oh, it must be true because it was said by Joe Rogan. And another example of that was when he had Matt Walsh on, and Matt Walsh made a very insane claim that there were like tens of thousands, if not millions, of trans surgeries going on amongst children. And Jamie, who is Joe Rogan's back end helper there, he looked it up and proved that it was wrong, like it was completely wrong. And Matt Walsh just said, "Well, it feels like it's true." And that goes to my larger point about it being about emotion. It's wanting to confirm what you already believe in. And so even when you say these things that are demonstrably false, it just, even when you disprove them, even when all these things happen, it doesn't have the same effect, because it becomes a emotional thing for you rather than a factual thing.
Right. And it's all psychological, because even though that very same clip with Matt Walsh has the correction in it, how many people are hearing just the message of the false information and are clinging to that part of it and ignoring the retraction afterwards and just saying, well, that's what it feels like, so that's what it has to be.
Yep, and the Jamie part of the Joe Rogan podcast is a little bit different, because most fact checks are done by institutions and groups that are well known, such as Google, Fact Check, PolitiFact, all these type of groups that do this. But even they now are becoming under attack by, they are biased, right? They are the ones who are biased because they're not confirming what I already believe in. And so you get this kind of reciprocal thing where even the people whose job it is to fact check all sides, they don't care, who it is who's making the claim. When you have one side, and this is not, a ubiquitous statement, but there is one side that is making claims more often than not that are false. And so therefore there are going to by nature be more claims that are going to be disproven on that. Then they say, well, that's a bias. Right. When no, it's just that in the ecosphere of social media and in news, we have one particular group that is more likely to make false claims than another group. Not that there's not false claims on the left, because there are. It's just that the left makes more few of those claims, and therefore there's not as much to fact check on.
Right. And let's talk a little bit about bias. You mentioned that the fact checking sources that are supposed to be impartial, that are just doing research and presenting the actual information against a claim that's being made, people are saying that these are biased. Bias is not inherently a negative word. We all have a bias. We all have biases. I can never remember. But one of the biggest revelations for me on that is, in doing this podcast, there's a lot of misinformation about the LGBTQ community, and they call it grooming. And one invaluable resource to that has been a spreadsheet about who is making the news I'll make sure I'll put a link in it because I don't remember the actual URL, but they compiled every headline over about a 3-year period of crimes against children involving sexually inappropriate behavior, be it overt or messaging, catfishing, grooming, all of this data. And overwhelmingly, there was a pattern of there were very few trans people, and I think over the 3-year span, one drag queen who was the perpetrator of these crimes. That's the biggest takeaway there. But when I looked at it, I was very shocked to see that the largest demographic was teachers. And exactly like you said, I had an emotional response of, I support teachers, so that doesn't sound right. Although doing research on the topic more, it comes down to proximity to the victims. Teachers, just statistically, they have the largest amount of time that is close to these people, that these children that are the victims of these crimes. So statistically, it does work out that yes, teachers would be one of the largest, if not the largest, perpetrator of these crimes. But I have a bias towards teachers. I support teachers. So I immediately didn't believe it. But I was faced with the information and I had to confront that bias.
Yeah, that that's a good example. I mean, biases are not in of themselves good or bad, right? There's nothing in a bias that makes it good or bad. It's how it's applied because there's a whole list of biases that that a psychologist have documented, but we all have biases that we use every minute of every day to make our low level executive decisions that without them we would our brain would fry because it takes so much energy to be able to process it all. So these things are very common, and for you it wasn't necessarily that your bias toward teachers is a bad thing, because I would say having a bias toward teachers is a good thing. We support teachers, we want them to have a high pay and have all the resources that they need. But the problem with that, though, is that it becomes bad when you see a report that shows that they are, doing these bad things, or they are the plurality or majority of the cases, and that challenges what we believe in as what it means to be a teacher. And so I would say, in addition to your bias, you also had some like cognitive dissonance there. You were like, in my head, I can't put these two things together. They won't fit well. And therefore, I either have two choices. I either have to get rid of my old belief for the new one, or I have to throw out the new belief and stay with the old one. And most people stay with the old belief. That's what they stay with the old belief because it's more comfortable, and they know it, and it makes them feel better rather than trying to accommodate that new belief. And I think that's a very human thing to do.
Really quickly, just to get into this a little bit more, let's just clarify, what is the difference between plurality and majority?
Sure. So a plurality is lower than 50%, so it means that you got the most of something, but it's below 50%. Whereas a majority is anything above of 50%. So as an example, if I'm running for office and I am going against three different parties and I get 45%, they get 35%, and then the other one gets the remainder. I won a plurality of those votes because 45 is the most, but it's less than the 50%. And then, but if, as what happens in most elections here in the United States, you have two parties running, one will get 52% of the vote and one will get 48. That is a majority. So that's what we mean by that.
Right. Thank you. And for the statistic I cited earlier about it was incorrect. It was not the majority. It was a plurality of and this is not an empirical study. This is just the headlines and looking into the information presented. The plurality of headlines involving crimes against children were with teachers at about 20%, and about 18% were religious workers. So again, the framing there is important. So yes, it was a plurality and not a majority. And again, tying this in with the overall topic, when we look at something like Joe Rogan, who is citing misinformation, and then it's being picked up by mainstream news that is citing Joe Rogan's podcast where he just says it happened. Let's take that as an example to look at how we research and what media literacy entails when we look at sources for information.
Yeah. So one thing I'll say before that, just to jump in, is also that one of the things that will often people will do to kind of disguise their misinformation that they're giving is they'll say, "I'm just talking. I'm just spitballing. I'm just having a conversation," right? That's the big one now. Is we're just having a conversation. But the problem is when you're in positions of authority, like Joe Rogan is, when you have millions of listeners, your conversations are taken as authority, and and that leads to kind of how you challenge authority, which is one of the big hallmarks of any type of digital literacy, whether it be media or anything else. We want users to challenge authority. Now, what does that mean? What that means is you look at a piece in the media or a piece of information with a skeptical eye. You use critical thinking to understand what it is that they're trying to tell you, who the audience is, what the content actually contains, and you basically move beyond the headline, right? And so you're trying to understand all of the multifacets of what this piece of information is and how it fits into what you need, rather than what you want. That's a big thing too. Is in media literacy, and then in my field, which deals with information literacy, we have a big emphasis on finding about finding, but also understand why you're trying to find this thing, what it is that you need to get, because of for a lot of people, they go searching on this wild goose chase, not with no clear idea about what it is they're trying to find, what kind of information that they're trying to find. And so media literacy and all these things basically allow you to hone the skills that we all have to be able to think critically and think deeply about the content that you are finding and engaging with. That's the hallmark, I would say, of good literacy, to be able to understand that.
In terms of information literacy, let's look even further beyond what is a looking beyond a headline or looking at what is a reputable source or whether or not something is biased. Let's talk a little bit about corroborating information across multiple sources, because that seems to be one of the biggest things that people have a hard time with. Another great example with an authority figure is Donald Trump at the presidential debate saying that Haitian immigrants are eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio.
Mhm.
What corroborating information can we gather to determine what the truth is on this story?
Yep. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, one of the each media literacy has many. It's defined differently by different people, and it has different core concepts and core definitions depending on who you ask. But I would say what you're getting at is this idea of confirmability, right? You want to confirm what this one headline is saying, and so you are looking beyond for other reputable sources that are also saying the same thing, or they have evidence of the same thing. That lends credence to that one article that you read. But then that then begs the question: what makes a source reputable, to be able to know whether or not they are telling the truth? And the truth is, there's a lot of different ideas, and a lot of them are kind of old fashioned, unfortunately. So what I mean by that is a lot of the news sources that we go to are established old legacy type sources, things like CNN, the New York Times, the Post, the Journal, all these things that have been established for decades, if not hundreds of years. I think the Post started in like 1860 something. So for more than 100 years, right? And they have established themselves as a newspaper of record that they tell facts, and they do all this. that does allow some kind of credence. But then that also brings up the question: then you're supposed to challenge authority. So then you have to be very critical towards those. Not saying that it's all false, but just being critical of it. And I would say that how you do this is you look at the reputation of it and you keep like a master list in your mind of like where you should go, places like the Times, the Post, the Journal, CNN, things like that, to get the base level news, like what is the news saying, right? And then when they make a claim in there, hopefully the journalist will give you the reason why they're making the claim, right? They will say, I heard from X person, or this happened today at 9 o'clock on the East Coast, and and it happened here. That I think is where you can then build to understand where to go look, because typically there's a source for that. There is somewhere that you can go to be able to look, because, like, for example, if it says this senator told CNN this, okay, well then you can go look up and see, did this senator tell it to other people? Did like he put out like a press release? Did he do all these different things? And then that adds to the reputability of it. But what makes it difficult in this fraught times that we have is that people simply do not trust these things. So the reputability, or the a reputation chain, the one that is kind of holding everything up, is becoming very, very loose, right? It's becoming very, very fragile. And so when you don't trust the Times, when you don't trust the Post, there's not many other places that you can go to that have that same reputational type of guardrail, and then that opens you up to less ability to fact check, less ability to be able to find the information from an unbiased source that is giving you the actual information that you desperately need.
So definitely one of the biggest things here is when looking at modern media literacy and navigating news and misinformation, challenging authority is very different from blind mistrust of established institutions.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, to challenge authority. So my field, I'm in higher ed, and we have these frameworks that were built to kind of help us. And one of the first frameworks is that authority is contextual, and it's context dependent. And all that means is that you can get authority from a lot of different places. Right, is that it comes from different places, and that you shouldn't trust just one authority simply because it is the long established authority. However, what I say for this is that when it comes to the media, this is kind of turned on its head a little bit, because in the media there are established authorities. There are people that have been doing this for years and years, and have built a reputation for providing accurate type of information that will then get you to the source that you need. And it doesn't mean that this person is unbiased, right? It doesn't mean that. It simply means that they are coming from an institution that has guardrails, that basically guides them on how to speak about what it is that they found. That's what makes the Times and the Post and the Journal and all those things so important, is that they have guidelines that say one writer has to write this way, or they separate their news departments from their opinion departments. So the news just tells you what is actually being said, right, and what's actually happening, and they're not opining on what's actually happening. So when you're reading a news source, and if you see somebody openly talking about their opinion on the issue, and they're saying, I think this, I feel this, something like that, that's a clear indication that you're not in a straight news thing. You're in kind of a more opinion based, that you should look at with a lot more challenging of that authority.
And when it comes to higher education and this idea of challenging authority and how it's sort of being misconstrued lately, there's a lot of talk about control of education, with the new administration saying they're going to disband the Department of Education. And it seems that they're also coming after higher education as well. Do you have any thoughts on where?
I mean, the war against higher education has been going on for a long time. There's been varying degrees of success. Some it's been mostly on a state level, I would say. Places like Florida and things like that have enacted orders and laws that seek to stifle what a university can teach, things like that. And there's always been this kind of battle going on between what is what how much leverage higher education can have, and this is for this is not apropos of anything really, but it really is true that I would say that it's coming from one side. It's because they see higher education as a bastion of left wing thinking, and that they're indoctrinating again all these slogans that just confirm what you're already thinking, and so it makes it difficult, not to, for like challenging authority. And what that means is when people hear that, I think they think it means go out and protest, or they mean go out and like rah rah rah. When that's not the case, all we mean is that think about authority in its own context. That it's contextual, right? Because, for example, we as librarians would say, depending on the subject that you're studying, you shouldn't give primacy to the Times when you're studying, say, a Native American culture, when an equally, if not better, authority would be firsthand accounts written within the diary of some person who was actually involved in some kind of conflict, right? Those two things do not have the same type of authority, but people in their head have an idea about what authority is, and so they will navigate towards that sounds right to them. So they'll go to the Times rather than go to a lesser known authority. That's what we mean by challenging authority, and to look at it in a contextual, context based way.
And there's definitely a rise in, I don't know how best to put it, but just ascribing authority to the wrong people, like RFK Jr. as the head of Health and Human Services, when in 2005 he published an opinion piece about vaccines causing autism and their adverse effects, when scientists and his peers at the time said that the science and all the information available was to the contrary. He still put out that information, and people who are supporting Donald Trump for president and people who are on that side of the aisle and maybe a little more fringe, far off, are ascribing authority to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., where he doesn't really have the medical expertise per se.
Oh yeah, very much so. And that again, what that does is, once again, it leans back into our old friend confirmation bias. It leans back into the fact that, oh, there's this man whose authority, I would argue, comes from his last name. Right? People trust Kennedys. And so, and because people trust Kennedys, and because he's the son of one of the most famous Kennedys, that lends him some authority. People want to hear him talk when he has something to say. And so when he says, as he did, I think in the last year or two, there is no such thing as a safe vaccine. That is verbatim right from his mouth, right? People then who have these heuristics, they have confirmation bias, but will go, well, look, I already didn't trust vaccines, but now RFK Jr. saying it. And he's a Kennedy. He's been in the field, trying to fix medicine and everything for almost 3 decades. He clearly knows what he's talking about, when that simply is not the case. This is what a lot of these individuals do. I would highly recommend to anybody, if you look up any of the well-known doctors who are on social media, the ones who critique kind of the pseudo health that's been going on, about people talking about raw milk, and people talking about vaccines and all these things, or people who are really critiquing them. They provide you with the evidence to say what people like RFK are doing is a sleight of hand. That's what they're doing, is they say things that are in a way very confident, and it makes people think, oh, he must be right, but yet the information that he says has just enough truth, just enough to pass that like vibe check, but the rest of it is just total bunk. That's that's the problem, and that goes back to the idea of people not having well defined in their head media literacy slash literacy in general to be able to understand, is this actually true what he's saying, or should I do my own research and all that and go into it? And we could talk about that later too, what it means to like do your own research, because that's the thing that people always say, and yet very few people know how to do it well. That's also a big problem.
Of course. Maybe another time we can do a whole other conversation about doing your own research. But I do want to put a button on this because it does come to a very poignant message of, they always will say, like, if when they have their confirmation bias and are presented with factual information to the contrary, sometimes the thought terminating cliche, the be all end all for them is, let's just agree to disagree. And of course, you can't agree to disagree on facts. You can't have alternative facts. You can have different opinions. But the more important thing is, what are the consequences for these false narratives? When people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. are spouting vaccine misinformation, in the last 10 years, we see a rise of preventable diseases that are coming back, like a rise in measles. We saw a case of polio recently. Like things that, there are consequences to this. When Donald Trump said that Haitians are eating cats and dogs, there was a surge of bomb threats in Springfield, Ohio, because of this rhetoric. It does have consequences. There are people who are going to lash out either violently against a community like in Ohio, or people who are going to make less than healthy choices with abstaining from vaccines that are going to cause preventable diseases from having a resurgence.
Yes. Um, that's entirely true. I would say that we can disagree about things that are opinion based, right? You tell me that your favorite color is blue and my favorite color is purple. We can agree to disagree. There's no consequence to that. However, when it comes to things like all vaccines are not safe, that is a fact. That's an empirical question, and it's a question that is not backed up by any science. And as you said, it does have real world consequences. RFK was in the very least somewhat uh, uh, responsible for a measles outbreak in American Samoa, because he went down there and campaigned against the measles vaccine, and then lo and behold, shortly thereafter, a huge measles outbreak that ended up killing some children happened. And of course, he says I had nothing to do with it, nothing to do with it, right? But yet we see these direct correlations and what I would even argue causations for these things happening, and then people saying, "Well, I didn't do this because all I was doing was simply talking." Right? I was just talking about it, and then they kind of throw off their actual blame for it. And the same thing goes for when members of the LGBTQ community are attacked and shamed and all this for the language, and they say, "Well, I'm just talking about it." Yes, we can have these academic level type of discussions, but at the end of the day, what what's happening within our public discourse is anything but academic. It is said with an air of factual basis. It's said with an air of confidence that makes people who hold these opinions already believe them, and then they go out and they then try to change because they see these things as threats to themselves, to their family, and to their country. And that's what really makes this stuff very dangerous, is that yes, we need to talk about it, but there's a way to do it in a way that isn't going to lead to all of these larger societal problems.
Thank you, Matt. Is there anything you want to say before we head out?
The only thing I'll say last is just to plug a resource. We talked about banned books a little bit. The University of Chicago has a program where they're making 1,400 books that are on the banned list, free and openly accessible to anybody within the public. If you go to a University of Chicago banned books on Google, they should pop up, and you just download a fun little app, and then you will have access to more than 1,400 banned books from all the country free of charge. You don't have to pay, you don't have to sign, you don't have to do anything like that. All you have to do is just sign up for it, and then you'll get access to it. This is a way for us to be able to help combat these, is by getting the word out that even in all states, no matter where you are, this is a free public service that one of the leading universities is providing. And so I hope everybody does take advantage of that, because it is one of the ways that we can challenge these draconian book bans.
Thank you very much. This has been an interview with Rockin.Librarian. You can follow him on TikTok at Rockin.Librarian, as spelled in the podcast title. You can also check out his work whenever he goes live. He does so on his own channel, as well as on large creators like Parker and Dean. This has been another episode of the Book Fair Podcast. I do thank you so very much for listening. Please make sure you follow or share the podcast with any friends, relatives, educators, or young readers in your life. And as always, I'll talk at you next time.